Welcome back to the Vanessa G Fitcast. I'm Vanessa Pozos, and here with me is Omar Pozos, my co-host and husband. And today, we're actually recording this one on the 4th of July. So as you guys listen, I hope you had a great 4th of July weekend. You know, if 4th of July was a while ago, if you're listening to this later, I hope that whatever time of year it is for you, I hope you are having a great time.
What's your, now I'm going to put you on the spot. What's your go-to 4th of July either dessert or food to eat on the 4th? Like, what's America to you?
Oh, I mean, burgers and hot dogs, of course. Yeah. And like anything that comes off the grill, I'm happy with, let's be honest.
You're not a big fan of the hot dog eating contest, are you?
No, I want to, if it's me, I'm like, I want to like savor my food. And so just the whole spectacle of watching people just shove this food down to me is repulsive.
I think it's a very American thing to watch, but
yes.
That's just me.
Yeah. Well, you know, speaking of kind of shoving food down, no, not necessarily. What I want to talk about today is overeating patterns. And I think this episode is going to be timely probably for some people because I think around holidays especially, people tend to find themselves in patterns of overeating. I know for myself, I historically have a pattern to where I would say around like the holiday season of like November, December, that holiday season is when I most find myself inclined to overeat. And then kind of that other like 6 months halfway point through the year, which is where we currently are around June, July, I tend to find myself overeating more. And for me personally, that's because we have, you know, both of our birthdays back to back. We have a lot of other birthdays within our family, you know, going into summertime. For me, I love good summer treats.
Margaritas, tacos.
Yeah. So it's like, there's just like a lot more opportunity, I think, at these points in time of year to overeat. And so I know that I'm not alone in probably that type of a pattern. I know that somebody else out there probably is tuning into this episode because they're like, oh my gosh, I've been overeating, or maybe I just overate, and you're probably feeling some guilt, some shame. You're just feeling, you're just bad about yourself. And I hope that this episode and what we talk about today helps you out, because I think a lot of people, if you resonate with what I'm saying there, if you feel like you just overate and you're feeling bad about yourself, you probably also are feeling this sense of defeat around your relationship with food, around your ability to reach goals that involve nutrition. You know, maybe you're feeling like your eating habits are just out of control. You feel like you're never going to get where you want to be with your relationship with food and with your body. And that's really frustrating. But I want you to remember that your relationship with food and that your eating habits are not some pass-fail thing. Part of being human is knowing that you are going to have periods of your life, you're going to have days, you're going to have weeks, times where you find yourself in patterns of overeating. And the goal was not to just eliminate overeating forever and be this robot who never, ever overeats. No, the goal, and something that we work on a lot with our clients, and I still work on this with myself constantly all the time, is using these overeating instances as an opportunity to kind of analyze and collect data about who we are as people, about our patterns, about our, about our habits and choices, and essentially figure out from this information how we can better navigate our own relationship with food.
Yeah. And to your point, Ness, I think the other thing that I hope people can resonate with the episode is it happens to all of us, like you, myself included. And I think at times, like you were saying, you know, when you have an episode like that, or when you just had a meal that you felt icky about, or you don't feel great about, and you're punishing yourself, or whatever that might be, it's like you said, nobody likes to go back and like relive that moment and pick up the lessons and pick up, you know, the information, the habits and stuff that you're doing. And I think you're right. People, myself included, we try to just forget about it. I'm like, oh, I'll just do better the next time. But then the next time comes and you do the same thing and you never learn from it, and so on and so forth. And I think that's where a lot of people, and again, speaking from my own experience here, we don't break that cycle because we never analyze it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. I think especially if people aren't taking a step back and, you know, listening to something like this episode, then they can find themselves over time as they overeat. It starts to kind of erode their own self-confidence and their own just like thoughts about themselves. They start to lose trust with themselves, and they start to just lose faith in their ability to ultimately, have that kind of relationship with food and body that they ultimately want to have. And so that's why, you know, I was wanting to talk a little bit more about the fact that overeating does not mean that you are a failure or that you can't reach your goals or anything like that. So rather than allowing your brain to make an overeating instance mean something that it doesn't and mean something that is ultimately not going to be helpful for you, I want to offer up 6 other kind of options for you here of what your overeating instance might actually mean.
I like this. I like the perspective shift on this approach.
Yeah. Well, let's dive in here. So you just overate, or maybe you've been overeating. What does it mean? Like, what's actually happening here? Well, the first one that comes up for me that I often see is, it can mean that you just don't eat that food often enough. So, like, for example, we're talking here about the 4th of July. I think that could be an opportunity for people to be exposed to different types of foods that they just don't eat very often. And they might inherently be thinking, well, like, I never have this food. I need to eat more and more and more of it.
Right.
We see this a lot around holidays. But this doesn't have to be limited to holidays. We see this often just with people who maybe are unnecessarily restrictive with their diets. So, like, for example, I was talking with one of our coaches here the other day, and she was telling me about how she's been working with a client of ours in Vital Spark, and she's been essentially helping a client through this kind of exact scenario here. So this client came to her and said, you know what? I feel like I can't keep chocolate in the house. I'm not going to allow myself to buy any chocolate. I'm not going to have chocolate in the house anymore. Like, I cannot have chocolate around, or else I will absolutely overeat on that chocolate. And so, our coach here, Liv, who's an incredible coach, she, of course, very, very empathetic here. She's like, you know what, can I challenge you here? Like, are you open to me challenging you here? And this client, very growth minded, was like, yes, absolutely. And so essentially what Olivia offered her is a additional kind of perspective and a challenge along with this. And I love it. Liv called this the chocolate experiment. She said,
shout out to Liv on this one.
Yeah, she said, are you open to doing a chocolate experiment here? Where rather than saying, you know what, I can't have chocolate around, I'm never going to have it in the house, let's do the opposite of that. Let's keep it in the house and let's have a piece of chocolate every single day. And she's like, just stick with me on this one. I promise you. And this is an experiment. Of course, different people respond differently. She's like, but I have a really good feeling here that if you allow yourself to have chocolate every single day, I bet you within, maybe a week or so, maybe 2 weeks, you're going to find yourself feeling very in control with chocolate because it's something that isn't so off limits anymore. It's something that you eat all the time to where it just feels like another thing you eat. It doesn't feel special to where you don't feel inclined to overeat it when you are eating it because you actually genuinely have trust with yourself that, you know what, I'm going to have this again tomorrow. I don't have to eat it all right now.
It's almost, we talk about this all the time, but it's what you resist persists, right?
Exactly.
And the more, because I'm the same way, I'm like, I can't have this, I can't have that. And when I do have it, I'm like, I'm balls to the wall so honestly, I might give this a try myself. I think this is a great experiment.
Yeah. And so, with the experiment, I'm sure people are wondering, well, how did that end up going?
Yeah, I was going to ask.
Yeah. So essentially, not even a week later, really only, I think maybe like 5 days into it, the client reached out to Olivia and she's like, oh my gosh, it's amazing. She's like, I just don't even feel like I actually really care to have chocolate right now. She's like, I'm still kind of allowing myself to have it each day. She's like, but right now I just don't even really feel like I want it. And I feel very much in control. I feel like, you know what, I could not have this today. And she's gotten to that point where now she doesn't have it. She keeps it around and she has it when she wants it, but she's not even having it every day anymore because it's something that just feels like another food that she can have anytime. She has that trust built within herself.
Yeah. And one thing I want to point out too is I think sometimes doing something like this is very scary, especially for somebody that, has been dealing with the same cycle over and over. So that's where I think having a support system, having the right structure that allows you to experiment with these type of things is so helpful because without you having somebody to do that with, you yourself, like you're not going to be able to do it. It's hard. So having that structure, I think that's the key difference to trying things like this and just experimenting and improving and I guess improving that relationship with food too.
Yeah, because I guess I should clarify as well. Of course, I very much summarized and simplified that story of, how Coach Olivia was working with this client. Of course, there's a lot more conversations that are happening of a lot more working on the mental and emotional side of the eating experience. But ultimately, this is something that I think our listeners can take away of you can try this out. If you think that maybe this is what's resonating with you, maybe your overeating does mean that you're just not allowing yourself to eat this food often enough, then it might be something where maybe you need to try an experiment like this, where take the thing that you find yourself more inclined to overeat and just eat it every day until it does not feel special and does not essentially like ignite an overeating experience.
Yeah, absolutely.
Awesome. So that's number one. Number two of what your overeating experience might mean is that you just have not given yourself full permission to eat these foods yet. Kind of similar here as number one, but it needs to be separated out because there is a little bit of a nuanced difference here. You might be regularly eating something, but you still might not have full trust in yourself that you actually are allowed to eat it. You might have these underlying food rules that might have been ingrained in you from years of dieting, that you might truly believe that this food is bad or that you shouldn't have it, or that at some point in the future, you're no longer going to allow yourself to have this food. So if this is you, you might find yourself in that kind of situation where you feel like, okay, I can only eat these foods under certain conditions. So like if I'm, not focused on dieting right now, then I'll allow myself to have all these foods all the time. And like, I'm basically doing the chocolate experiment. I'm allowing myself to eat it every day. Like I have trust in that, yet you have this like little voice, like subconsciously that's saying,
can you give us a little voice, please?
This is a little voice.
Oh my God. This is a little voice. All right, then go ahead. Yeah. Give us a little voice in what he or she says to
that little voice is going in your head and it's saying, you can't have this much longer.
Where is this little voice from?
I don't know. But that's the voice that's essentially telling you at some point there's an end date to this. Yeah. At some point you're not allowed to have this. After summer, you're going to be focusing more on your diet and you're going to cut out all carbs. Or, once you get into the new year, you're going to go Whole30. You're not going to allow yourself to have those things anymore. Like there are still food rules existing. So this is where we have to truly give ourselves absolute permission to actually allow ourselves to have any types of foods and remove all food rules. This is when I really do think that, a lot of people will take this the wrong way, where I think there's a lot of people that very much push like to the extremes of no food rules, only eat intuitively, any types of boundaries or rules or constraints around nutrition is bad. Like I think people can take it to an extreme, and then we have a lot of people that will come to us and say, I ping-ponged from one end of the spectrum to the other of really having like these heavy food rules, dieting really hard, to going to the other side of, no rules, I can eat anything I want. But then ultimately they're like, now I don't feel good. Now I feel like I'm actually just not in a good spot with my health at the end of the day, with my nutrition. I still feel like I'm just not fueling myself well. Well, this is where I like to find a middle ground. And this is where personally we really love learning and teaching how to track macros with our clients, because that inherently provides some type of boundary to make sure that you are still having something to ensure you're eating foods in quantities that are ultimately going to help you feel your best too. Yeah. So you can have total freedom in the types of food you're eating. You have the numbers to work with, and you are allowed to eat any food you want, but within those numbers keeps you from, let's say just only eating cake all day long, because you're not going to get your protein in and then you're not going to feel so good.
Yeah, and that's exactly what I was going to ask, is how do you find that middle ground? Because sometimes you're right. I think people go from one end to the other end of the spectrum, and then they continue to get stuck. But personally, I think we've talked about this in the past, but I think I found that with structure, with a little bit of guidance from things like macros or whatever that might be for the person. Like, for example, this morning we went to get bagels with my brother that was in town, right? So I had the bagel, and I think it was so good. And then I came home, and then for lunch, I was like, all right, well, I had a bagel, and like there was an egg and 2 pieces of bacon, not a ton of protein in there. So now for lunch, I had a tuna salad with a good bit of protein in there with some wild-caught tuna. So that's what I think a lot of people miss, is like, you don't have to cut out bagels. You don't have to cut out sweets, chocolates, whatever. You can still incorporate it, but just continue to make sure that, by the end of the day, you're still on track. You're still eating whole, nutrient-rich foods so that you can still incorporate the treats every now and again. And I think that's the balance that a lot of people missed, Yeah.
Well, I mean, I even think about a scenario like this morning where personally, like as we were getting ready to head out to breakfast, I was like, you know what? I don't really feel like I actually want a bagel this morning.
I was very surprised. I was like, whoa.
I was like, I think their bagels are great. Their breakfast sandwiches are absolutely the best in St. Pete. You know, go to Pete's Bagels if you're in town. 10 out of 10 recommend. But just because I allow myself to have these types of things anytime, that's also the same kind of like safety that gives me a very good feeling to where I can actually know, you know what, sometimes I actually just don't want that right now. And I knew that I actually felt like coming back and kind of making my own food at home. So I went with you, sat with you. But because I allow myself to have anything, when you tried out 2 different types of bagels, kind of had half of each, one of them was like, oh, that looks really good. Can I have a bite of that? Had a bite. That was great. Felt good about that. And then we went home. But in the past, when I would have lived on these like food rules to where like I think about when I didn't allow myself to have gluten or dairy, if you were eating this big fat bagel that's very filled with gluten with a big slab of cream cheese that's very filled with dairy, I would have been staring at that with this like underlying feeling of like, I can't have that.
I think it would have been more like, you can't have that.
Exactly.
Yep.
No, that would have been more of like the angry voice. You can't. But that's the reality, because I had not given myself permission to eat those things because I was living on food rules. So that would have made this feeling in me to where I would have probably sat there with you and I probably would have been grumpy. And then I would have come home and I probably would have tried to like appease this like anger and craving by like eating, I don't know, like gluten-free bread with like dairy-free cream cheese and like it not being very good and just eating a bunch of it to try and appease the craving. Nowadays, I allow myself to have those things. I don't really feel like I wanted to have one, but when it looked good and I wanted to try a bite, had a bite, and I felt great. Everything was great. So that's just a real life example of kind of what that looks like if you are allowing yourself permission. Now, number 3 on this list, so maybe those first 2 don't resonate with you. We're going to work our way through. We still have 4 more to kind of come through here. So this one I think is super, super common. I think this one's going to hit home for a lot of people. I personally found myself in this one a lot when I used to overeat all the time. And this is maybe the overeating just means that you are coping with a really difficult emotion or situation. This one is super
is a really hard
common
one too, I think.
Yeah. Well, like we've talked about this quite a bit, but I think it's worth always bringing this back up. Food itself is a source of safety for your body. Your brain is trying to protect you, and it is always seeking safety. Also, specific foods, there's a reason why we tend to call certain things comfort foods. A lot of foods provide us with a sense of comfort, with a sense of just like good emotions along with it, whether it's something that you maybe associate with a time of your life where you felt really relaxed and comfortable.
Like a childhood memory or something.
Yeah, it could be something like that. But regardless, indulgent foods typically do give us that sense of comfort and safety. So if you are in a place where you're dealing with a difficult emotion, maybe you've been really stressed, maybe you just got into like a fight with somebody, maybe you're upset, you're angry, maybe you're dealing with something really difficult, really hard in your life, and you're just really sad. Like whatever it is, it's so normal to in that emotional state to turn to food, and in doing so to overeat as we seek more and more and more of that comfort, of that feeling of safety from the food. So for this one, it's not something where I want to be like, okay, let me give you all these tools on how to prevent this, because at times I think this is just a human nature thing. I think the biggest thing to talk about here is what you do after these situations, because as we all know, anybody who's been in this situation, 9 times out of 10, after the eating experience is done, you feel worse, because now the thing that still created the difficult emotions is probably still existing, probably was not solved by you eating. It was just temporarily kind of numbed a little bit. So those feelings come back. But now oftentimes we find ourselves also feeling guilty and feeling shameful because of the fact that we overeat. So now it's even more intensified. So in this situation, I would really, really encourage you to take a moment and actually feel the emotion that's really difficult for you right now. Like truly sit in it and feel it. For some people, this might mean doing a full body scan of noticing, okay, where is this feeling in my body? Like, can I identify first off what specifically is the feeling? Maybe go to feelingswheel.com and see if something resonates with you there. And then once I know what the feeling actually is, can I actually feel this in my body? Like, is it in my chest? Is it in my arms? Like, where is the feeling actually in my body? What does it feel like? Can I describe it? Like, that alone can really, really help settle a heavy and difficult emotion. For other people, it might mean that maybe we need to spend some time journaling or even talking to somebody, like really just working through the thoughts around this emotion and the thoughts that are causing the emotion and the feeling. So I would just say, if you find yourself, especially reoccurringly, overeating, and you think it might mean that you were just dealing with a difficult emotion, or you are currently dealing with a difficult emotion, I would just recommend, rather than trying to implement tools to prevent the eating experience, let's work on the feeling. Let's work on feeling the feeling, because as we start to appease that, you're going to naturally find that you don't overeat so much anymore, because you don't have to numb yourself, essentially.
Oh, I like that word. Good gosh. Yeah, I like that word, the numbing aspect of it. And I think, if you want better answers, you got to ask yourself better questions, right? And nobody wants to sit in that feeling because it's uncomfortable, and I hate doing it myself. But when you have an understanding of what's causing these things, how is it affecting you, like Vanessa was saying, where do you feel it? What color is it? All of these things can lead to you be like, okay, like, it's just a feeling. It's okay. I'm not dying. Like, nothing's happening. Like, we're going to be okay. It allows you to just have more freedom, I think, at times, as opposed to it, like you said, just overtaking your body and being like, I need to numb this right now, and seeking food out of that comfort.
Yeah.
I know it sounds a little woo-woo, but I've done it myself, and I know it works. It's not fun because nobody wants to sit in those feelings, but I think it can be super, super helpful for a lot of people. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, so that is number 3. So we're halfway through this list. If one of these has not hit home for you yet, stay tuned, because I have 3 more here for you. So number 4 on this list of what it might mean when you are overeating. This one is more of a physiological explanation, a physiological meaning, essentially. What this might mean for you, number 4, is that you simply waited too long to eat. Oftentimes, overeating is really just coming down to that physiological sensation in our body of, I waited too long to start eating again, and now my hunger is so strong that that's when I feel almost out of control. I'm, like they say, thinking with your stomach instead of your brain. Now you maybe eat too fast, and then you just get past
guilty.
that point
I'm
of
guilty.
and then now you eat past that point of satisfaction because you swung too far from one end of the spectrum to the other, too far from like starving to stuffed.
I feel like I when I was a kid, I used to get migraines from this stuff just because I would go so long without eating, and then next thing you know, like, I'm just ravenous, and it's crazy.
Yeah. So let's talk about, why does this really happen? Oftentimes, for a lot of people, it's a blood sugar regulation issue. So if you're going for longer than 3 to 4 hours without eating, except for that overnight kind of fasted period, if you're going through the day and you're waiting like 5, 6, 7 hours to eat, you're going to find that your blood sugar is going through big spikes and crashes. And when it hits a crash, that's when our hunger hormones really kick in. Our body's going more from this like physiological place of like, okay, we need to get some glucose in our body. So that's where especially the cravings come in a lot harder. And now we're reaching for more like easy to digest carbs. So typically more like sugary types of things, more like chips or cookies, like things like that. And suddenly we've eaten the whole bag of chips and we're like, what the heck just happened? It's not that you have this like lack of willpower. It literally might just be that you went too long and your blood sugar crashed. So simply when it comes to this one, let's just stay on top of aiming to eat balanced meals every 3 to 4 hours. So it does not mean every 3 hours, grab a little handful of strawberries or something. Like, actually eat something balanced.
Grazing throughout the day, basically.
Yeah, put some yogurt with your strawberries. Like, let's have some Greek yogurt with some protein and the strawberries as carbs, and like make sure that we actually are pairing our macronutrients and keeping our blood sugar balanced.
No, I agree.
So that's number 4. Number 5. Now, again, this one is also a little bit more physiological, but this one I think is less of like the day-to-day. This one is typically the result of making a very common mistake. So with this, that you're overeating, especially if you find yourself like recurringly overeating right now, it might mean that you have just been under eating and your body is now seeking nourishment because of it.
Do you think that, I know that fasting, a lot of these approaches have a lot of benefits, and I'm not arguing that, but do you think that a lot of people that do things like that for the weight loss approach deal with this?
Absolutely. I think a lot of people who have come from backgrounds of doing different types of fasts find themselves ping-ponging between like a fasting experience and overeating, whether it's intermittent fasting, overeating, or like these like deeper fasts. They tend to find themselves overeating afterwards. And so that's where, and we could, dive into like fasting and the science behind that. Like, it's not really, I hear a lot of people talk about it for weight loss. It's not a weight loss approach. It is not for weight loss, because you are typically going to find yourself physiologically now seeking more nourishment. Your body's going to try and essentially like course correct and find yourself now overeating and feeling out of control. But this doesn't have to come from a fasting sense. This can often come from people doing low calorie diets. So, I find this a lot when people are doing something like Optavia. I find this happens a lot. People who are, counting calories kind of on their own or tracking macros on their own, and their numbers are probably way too low, and like they might be able to stick it out. They get great results. And then suddenly they're like, what the heck? I'm gaining the weight back. I feel out of control with food. Well, you spent too long under eating. Your metabolism is adapted down, and your body is like, okay, we've got to get our metabolism back up. We've got to protect ourselves. And so it's triggering you to eat more and more. Your body's trying to protect you. It's not trying to hurt you. Just unfortunately, there was a mistake made in the fact that we did these extreme diets, and now we're paying the price for that. So ultimately, when it comes down to kind of working through this one, this is where we just need to course correct and go through more of a structured reverse diet. This is definitely where I think a coach is really, really necessary, because if you are overeating right now, but you know that you need a reverse diet, do not try and attempt that on your own. You're going to end up continuing to overeat, probably triggering binges, and ultimately gaining back a lot of weight unnecessarily. So that's number 5. Number 6, our final reason of why you might be overeating, or essentially another way, again, to look at this is, rather than making your overeating mean that you are wrong, you are a failure, you're never going to reach your goals,
you're
whatever.
A piece of crap. We're mean to ourselves.
Yeah. Whatever you are making it mean, instead, it might just mean that you are human, and overeating is just part of normal eating sometimes. Like we talked about at the beginning of this episode. You and I, we live, and like our world kind of revolves around nutrition. It's what we do for our living. It is a huge part of us. And yet we still find ourselves overeating at times. It is a natural human behavior. It's going to happen. You're not going to completely eradicate it from your life. I still overeat sometimes. Do I binge eat? Do I, shame myself because I had a little bit more than I should have? Do I go absolutely crazy with overeating? No, because I've done a lot of work on this. But do I occasionally find myself overeating and feeling uncomfortably full afterwards and being like, oh man, I really wish I hadn't eaten that much. I regret that. Yeah, I do, because I'm human and it's normal. And if you're listening to this, you're probably a human too. And you probably have found yourself overeating. And yeah, it's normal.
I think the biggest thing is just don't let it define you, right? It's okay to be human. It's okay to make mistakes. It's more so, what can we learn from it and how can we move forward with it?
Yeah. Well, let's talk about that then. If this is it, if you like gone through this list and you're like, I think that's it. I think there's not like a bigger meaning. I think it truly is just the fact that I'm human and sometimes I overeat. Well, here's kind of my advice for you. Really just focus on forgiving yourself quickly, not shaming yourself. Remind yourself, and like you might need to use this as an affirmation over and over again. I am human and humans overeat sometimes. And just remind yourself of that and get right back to normal. Don't try and undo it by now restricting or doing like extra cardio or working out extra hard or like doing anything crazy. If you feel really uncomfortable and you're like, I've got to do something about this, try like in the immediate experience afterwards, I would say maybe just like put a heating pad on your stomach can be really helpful if you feel like really uncomfortably bloated, really just like physically uncomfortable because you overate. That can be helpful.
Can I share something that works for me really quick?
Yeah, of course.
I think the biggest thing that has helped me is giving myself a little bit of time to either go for a walk or just you do a quick meditation, whatever. And as silly or woo-woo as that sounds, just giving your brain a break and like not letting the moment just like go all in. sometimes I'll come back from a walk and I'm like, maybe I don't want that. Or maybe I do still want it, and fine, then I'll go ahead and eat it. But it allows me to give myself a break between the moment where I'm going to overeat and the moment where I actually do it. And that has helped me just, if anything, bring a little bit of clarity to myself. And then if I still want to do it, then that's totally fine. But that's my choice, not an impulse decision or something in the moment, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's great advice for like, if you can catch yourself and you can like work on this. But again, I think a lot of people, like we're going to overeat sometimes because we're human. So if you did just overeat and you're like, oh my gosh, what do I do now? It's again, just forgive yourself. And then if you're uncomfortable, maybe try putting a heating pad on your stomach. Maybe try going for a gentle walk. It can be really helpful, not like a hard walk, but something really gentle. Try not to like lay horizontal. We have that inclination, we want to, but it's going to make it harder for your body to digest the food. So, stay vertical, maybe go for a walk, get some gentle movement to kind of massage your digestive tract. And then I would even say for people who are really like, oh my gosh, I feel like sick, I ate too much. I think sometimes that could be a sign that maybe we need a little bit of digestive support. So I don't typically talk about supplements, but like digestive enzymes can be something to keep on hand for these types of occasional situations. But then, once you find yourself more digested, if you just feel like, man, I feel bloated, I don't feel my best now, something that you can also do is just like focus on drinking some extra fluids. Again, get right back to normal meals. Definitely keep your fiber intake up. But I personally like to turn to like a peppermint tea or a ginger tea. Can also be very, very soothing for a bloated tummy. So if you are overeating right now, again, I just want to emphasize it's okay. You're human. It's going to happen. We can work on reducing these instances, and we absolutely should work on reducing them, but you're not going to completely just never overeat ever again in your life. It's going to happen. It's the world that we live in. So does not mean you're bad. It does not mean you're a failure. You're just human. I hope that you can find a meaning from this list that resonates with you and that can give you something to work off of, something to work on. But keep working on that healthy relationship with food. Keep staying committed to your goals. You're going to get there. Don't let these overeating experiences set you back. But I think that's it for today. I hope this was helpful for you guys. If it was, please do us a favor. Share it with a friend. Post it on your Instagram stories. Tag me at Vanessa G Fitness. Just get it out there. Share it with somebody. And then make sure that you subscribe because we'll be back next week with another great episode.
Bye, you guys.